Ancient engravings, icons, strange, as if someone had literally sprinkled the planet with sand and clay during some period of our history. Absurd monuments all over Europe show. Yes, indeed, we see it ourselves. For this, it is not necessary to read ancient manuscripts or go somewhere. It is enough just to go out into your own yard. Wherever you are in the city, village, countryside, and absolutely everywhere you will see flat layers of clay or sand covered with houses and floors. However, historians with determination, worthy of the best use to the pen from the ears, reject the theory of the cultural layer. Geologists with the same stubbornness stood up to defend the mechanism of weathering of rocks, and paleontologists will bite anyone who dares to question their dating. Good day, you are on the Epoch of Distrust channel with Mikhail Kalmykov. And today we will again talk about catastrophic events that happened on our planet not so long ago, and possibly we will open new boundaries and points of view on this problem. Demanding explanations about the buried cities of the careerist who settled in the warm and cozy duty in the historian's office is pointless. No one will cut the branch on which he sits and neatly eats up the grants. Still, it's like demanding them from a fanatic, very well acquainted with the topic, but subconsciously perceiving it as some kind of nonsense. For those who don't know, in modern understanding, lore is not an ear, nose, throat doctor. It's some background information about the world of a computer game or a book. For example, there is a book, The Lord of the Rings, and even a movie based on it. In the book, there is a certain plot and heroes, and actually, it tells a certain story. However, fans who are engrossed in the content of the book, game, or movie want more. They invent a whole world each, even the tertiary hero, they compose their own story. Where and how he was born, who are the parents, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, under what circumstances his mom and dad met, where they studied, what stories they got into, and so on and so forth and so on. Right down to the exchange rates of one imaginary country to another. They even hold costume carnivals, dressing up as heroes of their universe and reenacting certain episodes live. All of this is called lore. Fans are so immersed in their roles, know every detail of their imagined world so well that God forbids someone says something that doesn't fit into the canon. They can even kill. By the way, does this remind you of anything real? Apparently, such creativity, the creation of virtual personal worlds, is deeply ingrained in every person's blood. This is how contradictions between disciplines arise, such as, for example, between physics and chemistry. Some say that electricity is the movement of electrons with a mind-boggling speed from atom to atom, while others say that colossal energy is needed to tear even one electron from an atom. However, scientists do not particularly complex about this, since they are in one huge camp, officially called science. Therefore, they prefer not to see what does not fit into their official LOR. In any case, until the main author or someone from the official canonical historians comes up with something that will be popularly recognized as canon. For example, buried cities. It's getting to the point of absurdity. Thematic conferences are being opened, seemingly intended for the debunking of myths. However, the questions they debunk are frankly childish. That is, convenient for them personally, and they prefer not to notice serious questions. There is even such a trick in the dispute called a straw man. This is when the opponent himself comes up with a question, as if they asked him, he himself answers it and seems to have won the dispute. Yes, actually compare the conferences of scientists against myths and any Star Wars fan gathering, for example, or just cosplayers. Find, as they say, 10 differences. Well, what interests us with you is not an invented fantasy universe, but a real one. It's a clear thing that, trying to explain everything in some one way, you will fall into a similar trap against your will. That is, you invent your own lore, your own universe, but apparently there's no other way. Therefore, the hypothesis that can explain what you see with your own eyes as simply and clearly as possible wins, without inventing additional chimeras like quantum physics. And now I'll try to answer one of the very curious questions that are frequently asked to me. As you may remember in the very first episodes of the Unseen Apocalypse series, I assumed that asteroids quite rarely fell on Earth as a whole. Mainly they exploded still in orbit by the forces of Earth's gravity and fell already as fine dust on the surface, passing through the dense layers of the atmosphere, absorbing moisture and thus turning into streams of dirt and clay straight from the sky. Sometimes it was sand, but more on that in the first 3 episodes of the cycle. I've already answered some questions related to this. For example, why didn't the sand burn and turn into glass? However, there is still one unanswered question. Specifically, if the Earth got rings as a result of asteroid disintegration, why has no one described them? Why has no one seen them? Indeed, why? There are none on engravings, photographs, or paintings of the accretion disk ruins. But let's pose the question differently. Why exactly should we be able to see it? The example of Saturn immediately comes to mind, whose rings are so bright, dense, and beautiful that they can be seen even through the weakest telescope. They are so huge and dense that their shadow covers a good half of the planet's surface. And popular science publications vividly paint for us how these rings should be observed from the surface of Saturn itself. This means that those presumed dust rings I talked about in previous episodes should also be noticeable from the surface of the Earth. The logic seems clear, but let's first look at the process of these rings appearing around Earth and Saturn. Yes, of course. In both cases, their formation was associated with the powerful gravitational tides of celestial bodies, thanks to which these bodies were torn into fine dust. However, there are substantial differences. The first difference is, despite the fact that both planets use material torn from their fairly large satellites to form rings, their sizes differ significantly. The estimated diameter of each shattered satellite of Saturn was 3,000 kilometers or more. Approximately such sizes give analogous satellites at Jupiter and Saturn, which remained intact and occupy such close orbits. Then the asteroids shattered by Earth were obviously large, but still much smaller objects. Their diameter differed by an entire order in the smaller direction, and by mass even by several orders. As a result, the accretion disks that formed in Earth's orbit should have been tens, if not hundreds of times more charged than Saturn's. In addition, Saturn actually has 7 such rings, which could suggest 7 disrupted satellites, the remnants of which, by the way, are still contained within these rings. But even so, the lion's share of their mass is ice crystals, water, and methane, unlike Earth's, which were mostly made up of solid particles of silicate, aluminum, olivine, and even carbon and other constituents. That is, the mass of matter in Saturn's rings and the presumed rings of Earth is simply incomparable. The second difference is even more interesting. The thing is that Saturn's rings, as mentioned above, formed from already existing satellites, those that initially formed together with Saturn. And that's why they immediately occupied almost perfect circular orbits. Of course, thanks to this, the rings also turned out to be almost circular. They hang over Saturn as a continuous belt, so you don't need to make a great effort to see them. But everything is different in the case of Earth. As various simulations show again and again, Objects captured by the planet from space cannot occupy a stable circular orbit. It's simply impossible. In order for its orbit to become circular, either engine maneuvering is required, which, by the way, partly gave birth to the legend about the artificiality of the moon, or this space object must have been subjected to massive bombardment and gravitational competition with other similar objects in orbit. As a result, it will either be thrown into space, fall to Earth, or still take a circular orbit. We also conducted such a simulation in previous videos, and even with multiple repetitions, they give the same result. But at the moment of the formation of the Earth's rings, the moon was not yet there, or it was itself in the stage of formation. Therefore, the orbit of any captured asteroid was inevitably strongly elongated. Its perigee was the closest point to the Earth, and the apogee correspondingly was the furthest. The rupture occurred unevenly at the extreme points of its orbit, primarily at the point of perigee, here which in turn formed such waves of matter. Part of this matter immediately fell to Earth, forming regional fires of sand or clay on our planet, while the other part continued to move along the orbit of the ruptured asteroid. Thus, the field ring or several rings formed on Earth were firstly much less dense and massive than Saturn's, and secondly, due to a very elongated orbit and discontinuity of formation. They could only be noticeable during the passage of the perigee, and at that moment observers certainly weren't up to observing the natural phenomenon, as it must have been accompanied by a huge fall of dust, sand, and clay. There is another factor affecting the visibility of the accretion disk. Here's the thing, and who told you that the observer on Saturn can see the disks at all? A computer clip from National Aeronautics and Space Administration or Disney? After all, no one has ever landed on the surface of Saturn to look up and tell about the impressions of what they saw. Yes, indeed, it is unknown for sure whether it even has a surface. In other words, the atmosphere there is dense and very deep. Most likely, light does not reach the surface, if such a thing even exists, and no one will see any rings there. And although things are much better from Earth, but in our case, you will also see the ring. Not see. Firstly, thanks to the two reasons described above, and secondly, do you see stars during the day? Well, except for the sun, of course, no. During the day, no cosmic objects are visible at all. The atmosphere lights up absolutely everything. Well, except for the brightest ones, that is, the sun itself and sometimes the moon. But at night you won't see this ring because it's not made of water ice, but of dense chunks of matter with a small reflective surface. And even if you do see it, you'll probably mistake it for some tiny stars. At best, this ring will not reflect sunlight in sufficient quantity. But this is just my hypothesis. Let's try to model the conditions under which this accretion disk can be seen and see what happens. So, first of all, we can only see it at the moment of maximum proximity to Earth, that is, at the point of perigee. Secondly, it won't be a disk as such. These will be some very fast moving across the sky, some dark clouds most likely, of a strongly elongated shape, such transparent sausages. Such a view is justified firstly by the small diameter of the exploding object itself, 24 kilometers in diameter, and secondly, by the distribution of matter along the flatness of its orbit's ecliptic. Thirdly, since the passage of the ring particles will only be noticeable at its perigee, that is, at the point of maximum proximity to the surface, that part of the matter will pass through the atmosphere and inevitably fall to Earth in the form of sand and dust. In any case, we will not see the disk itself, since even without it, the strongly scattered stream will be completely covered by the atmosphere. Except for one case, if the stream passes exactly between the observer on the surface and the sun, then it will suddenly start to blink or even go out for a while. The exact same phenomenon occurs during a partial or total solar eclipse, when the moon does not fully cover the sun, but passes over a quarter, a third, or even half of the solar disk. In such a case, the moon cannot be seen with the naked eye, but only through darkened glass. And outside, everything will look as if just unexpectedly cloudy weather has set in. You've already guessed where I'm heading. If not, here are some facts for you. On the 23rd of October 2017, in Nigeria, Benin City, the sun began to flicker. This phenomenon was filmed by many people, so it was impossible to deny it. However, attempts were still made. For example, some believe that a solar eclipse was supposed to occur that day. However, no eclipses were planned for that date that year. This is one of the best examples of its kind, as it is well documented, filmed on multiple videos, and is simply in the perfect spot, practically on the equator. However, this is not an isolated case. On July 19, 2017, a similar phenomenon was caught on camera in Jamaica. And on July 20th, 2017, an even more interesting case occurred in Yakutia. Around 11 in the morning, the sun also suddenly turned off, and for several hours, a complete darkness fell on Earth. Then everything gradually returned to normal. Let's dwell on these last two cases in more detail. The thing is, at the height of the workday, you're unlikely to pay attention to the sun's flicker. Well, a cloud passed by. What's there to be surprised about? That's why you're unlikely to run for the camera leaving your work. However, the last two incidents in Yakutia and Jamaica were caught on tape. In the first case, eyewitnesses filmed it because the event was simply astonishing. In the second case, it was an automatic hotel camera. Fortunately, the camera recorded the exact date and time of the event. It was 10 minutes to 6 in the evening in Jamaica. The camera was pointed directly at the sunset. Considering the geographical location of Yakutia and Jamaica, several conclusions can be drawn immediately. Firstly, this happened almost simultaneously, despite the difference in dates in one day. Well, these are different hemispheres, so the dates differ. However, in reality, it was the same day and even almost the same hour. Secondly, in Yakutia, the sun went out for several hours completely, while in Jamaica, it just flickered. This suggests that Yakutia was at the point of maximum perigee of the stream, and the dust completely obscured the sunlight. Whereas Jamaica saw the same thing at a larger angle, so visually the stream was slightly below the sun and only partially and intermittently obscured it. The Jamaican camera couldn't capture this phenomenon during the day, because the stream and the sun were relatively far apart in different points in the sky. But as soon as the sun dropped low enough over the horizon, the stream began to partially eclipse it, causing the twinkling. In and of itself, if this were happening in Earth's atmosphere, we wouldn't see anything at a distance of more than 10,000 kilometers. However, this dust was indeed cosmic at a height of several thousand kilometers, so it was visible from two such distant points on Earth. And this even allows us to construct the assumed orbit of the ring, which seems to lie at an angle of more than 40 degrees to the plane of the Earth's ecliptic, which in turn unequivocally suggests that whatever this object is, it is clearly captured by Earth from space. Let's turn back the clock. The camera in Jamaica recorded the event at 5:52 in the evening, whereas in Yakutia, the next day had already begun at that moment. And considering the 10-hour difference, it was around 4 in the morning there. According to eyewitnesses, the peak of the eclipse fell on the period from 11 in the morning to 5 in the evening. That is, the difference was approximately 7 hours. There is no turbulence. Judging by the duration of the phenomenon, this flow is simply huge, and therefore its boundaries are quite blurred. Moreover, the residents of Siberia have been constantly scared of forest fires for the past few years. So the beginning of the phenomenon simply went unnoticed. Hardly anyone in Yakutia noticed in the morning that the sun was a little murkier than usual. However, when the flow gained strength, no one could miss such a phenomenon. By the way, I found that very hotel and the same camera in Jamaica that filmed what was happening. Here from this building, you will learn the details. Now, knowing the exact time, place and direction of the camera in Jamaica, knowing the time and place in Yakutia, we can get even more data. We know that there was a total eclipse in Yakutia that day. For this to happen, the stream must completely eclipse the sun, as for example, the moon does. The sun's angular diameter is approximately half a degree, just like the moon's, so the stream's angular diameter should be no less. In one of the very first videos, I calculated that the diameter of a shattered asteroid should have been about 200 kilometers. And this means that we can calculate the height of the stream's passage over Yakutia. Using a calculator, we input all three angles in the 124-mile side. The result shows a height of about 23 miles. But since for the Earth to tear apart a cosmic object, it must be closer to the Roche limit, that is 19,000 kilometers. We make a correction and get the refined diameter of the former asteroid, which is about 160 kilometers. Also, taking into account the duration of the Yakutian eclipse and orbital speeds, which cannot exceed the second cosmic speed for Earth, that is 11 whole and 2/10 kilometers per second. We understand that the length of the stream is about 40,000 kilometers. In other words, this asteroid was torn apart quite recently, which means it still has to be released onto Earth. Dirt with field sediments.
From 5 in the morning until 8:30 in the Verkhoyansk district of Yakutia, the sun was not visible. The district administration assumed that the sun disappeared due to smoke from forest fires. At the Phobos Weather Center, they explained that the situation could be related not only to this. According to specialists, the cause was also an atmospheric front with powerful cumulus clouds. The EDDS of the Verkhoyansk district confirmed reports of smoke in populated areas, exceeding the permissible concentration of carbon monoxide by 2 whole tenths of a milligram per cubic meter has been fixed.
By the way, have you noticed how unexpected field drills have been taking place lately? They often uncover the most unexpected places.
Wind gusts, smog, smoke, fires and sand everywhere. A powerful field storm in Krasnoyarsk. The worst situation is on the roads. Due to the squally wind up to 25 meters per second, visibility has practically dropped to zero. Most motorists found themselves in a difficult situation. Many even had to stop on the sidelines and wait out the weather. Those who decided to continue their journey noted that they had to drive very slowly as the sand obscured the view and they couldn't even see the car ahead.
On May 7th, 2022, a dust storm covered Khakassia, Krasnoyarsk, other parts of Siberia, which was characteristic, accompanied by suddenly started fires. Last year, unexpected dust storms covered Taganrog, and this year as well. Nevertheless, in May of 2022, a severe dust storm covered the Bryansk region. Where did it even come from? Dust around the forests, and in general, the 21st to 22nd year was rich in a large amount of suddenly appeared dust and storms all over the planet. Remember my video about the fire in Moscow and Chicago? Of course, witnesses from the official point of view begin to blame either the Sahara Desert or other deserts, since there is simply not enough sand and dirt to create similar storms in Siberia or Taganrog, for example. However, an immediate question arises. Well, if the dust is really brought in, for example, from the Sahara or Central Asia, then its path should be tracked by meteorologists, right? Or how did the dust, having taken off in the Sahara, covered itself with an invisible cloak and suddenly fell out in some other specific region? Of course not. The entire path of sand and dust, whether it is brought from the Sahara, must be clearly traced. Moreover, no special devices or service satellites are needed for this. Just follow the path of the sand. It will eclipse the sun, and since this does not happen, the only possible option for its appearance is an attack from space. But how recently could such an asteroid explosion occur, and why did we miss it, and we didn't miss it? We all saw it with our own eyes, yet the thought of something like this didn't even cross our minds. Now I'll explain, first of all, how, in your opinion, an asteroid explosion should look like, with tidal forces on orbit into small pieces. I'm sure many of you are now picturing a beautiful scene from Star Wars, with bright explosions in the sky and the sounds of nuclear strikes on the planet. Yes, so you can send all of this to the movies. In reality, it will look more like a crumbling piece of rock breaking into pieces. Take a hardened, followed piece of sand or clay in your hands and squeeze it hard. Part of the piece will break off. That's how it happens. Without explosions, bright colors, and the end of the universe light. Just fell apart, and that's all. Quietly, so you won't notice the process of falling apart. Got it. What's next? And then the pieces of the asteroid will take new orbits. And again, quietly, without thunder and lightning, they will gradually lower their orbit right up to falling on Earth. We've also figured this out. Now, for the most intriguing part, what will we actually observe? For this, let's look at the only fixed and proven case of such an object falling on a planet. I mean the fall of the Shoemaker-Levy comet in July of 1994 on Jupiter. As can be seen in the photos and videos, the comet, just as I described above, was torn apart by tidal forces into about 12 equal pieces before it fell. And then the most interesting thing happens. They lined up in a row with approximately equal distances between the fragments and fell neatly one after the other onto Jupiter. Doesn't this remind you of anything? If not, I'll give you a hint. On February 22nd, 1800, the first prototypes of Elon Musk's communications satellites were launched into Earth's orbit. Pay attention to the date, half a year before the Yakutsk eclipse. Since then, several thousand such satellites have been launched into orbit. Their characteristic feature is that they fly in caravans, just like the Shoemaker-Levy comet before it hit Jupiter. As they say, find 10 differences. By the way, their trajectory is very close to the one we just modeled with you. But does this prove deceit? No, of course, these are just circumstantial data. What really proves deceit is the simple fact that we see them. Well, look, every time a caravan of these objects flies across the sky, you see bright glowing points. But why then don't you see the International Space Station, which is hundreds of times larger than any of these satellites? Because the International Space Station doesn't exist? Not at all. The International Space Station just flies at an altitude of about 400 kilometers, and therefore always flying at night, it is in the shadow of the Earth. Elon Musk's satellites have an orbit just a bit above 550 kilometers. But even in this case, they will always be in the shadow of the Earth. We just shouldn't be able to see them. Because in order to come out of the Earth's shadow, they would have to be at a height of more than 15,000 kilometers, 30 times further. And even in this case, they won't always be visible. Then the million-dollar question is, what do we see then? And we just happen to see the remnants of that very asteroid. And here's a video of the meeting of two streams of Starlink satellites. I think everyone has seen this video, but look again carefully. Don't you find anything strange? It's video editing. Both streams are identical. Look at the intervals between the satellites. They perfectly repeat the same intervals in the first and second stream. Just a layer with a drawing copied and applied with a rotation of 90 degrees. I can do it easily too. But why fake a video like a real project? On the 9th of February, 2022, it was reported that control was unexpectedly lost over 40 satellites, and they will likely fall to Earth. Yes, it's as rare as the Shoemaker-Levy comet collision. Or perhaps they're masking the fall of real asteroid fragments in this way. So I think I've proven that not only did Earth have pole disks, but they still exist to this day. And yes, we don't see them, just as those who lived before us didn't see them. And we still have to get our share of clay from the heavens. By the way, attention to the conspiracy theorists. Recently, there have been a lot of suspicions that we have stopped flying into space, that many flights are filmed in pavilions on Earth. Maybe this is the answer. Maybe flights have just become very dangerous for living people. Well, we'll live. We'll see. To be continued.
In my opinion, it seemed to unfold in the following way. That is, it's a combination of factors. Well, first of all, yes, these forest fires that everyone is already tired of, high concentration of combustion products, and the second factor came into play. It's the passage of an atmospheric front with powerful cumulonimbus clouds. And so the content of these combustion products, that is, these